session. The purpose of this meeting is to describe the process and schedule that DEQ will use to develop a long-term statewide comprehensive climate action plan, or CCAP, and to get your input and feedback on what should be included in the plan to develop potential pathways to reduce climate pollution. This plan is being developed under a planning grant that was awarded to DEQ from the US EPA under the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, or CPRG. Since the award of this grant, the DEQ CPRG team has been busy developing various deliverables of the grant. Our accomplishments to date include the development of a short-term priority climate action plan, or PCAP, and applying for and securing 2 mitigation project implementation grants from EPA that will bring almost $200 million to the Commonwealth. As we move into the CCAP development phase, DEQ will be seeking input from a wide range of interested parties, including the public, major stakeholders, state agencies, and other groups on both the process and content of the plan. To this end, this is the first of 6 regional community events throughout Virginia. I thank you again for being here. We look forward to hearing your thoughts on both the process and plan to identify potential ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In a minute, I will pass the discussion over to Allison France, and before we do that, we will introduce the DEQ team that is here tonight. Starting with Mr. Dowd on my right.
Mike Dowd, Director of the Air and Renewable Energy Division for DEQ.
God damn it, you lost audio.
Good evening, my name's Danielle Sims. I'm our Environmental Justice Program Manager at Virginia DEQ. Hi. Okay. Hi, I'm Julia Wack. I'm the CPRG Administrative Data Coordinator.
All right. As mentioned, my name is Allison France. Thank you all for being here tonight, both virtually and online. So before we get started with all of the content of our presentation, we just want to give over a few ground rules for all of our virtual attendees to make sure that you can hear and see us okay, and so that you know how to use all of your different chat functions for tonight. So ultimately, we have a few functions that you're going to be able to use. The chat Q&A is the biggest. So the chat is where we'll be sending out any links that we're going to reference throughout the meeting tonight. So that's just going to be one-way communication from us to you. And then the Q&A is where you can input all of your questions, comments, thoughts, anything. If you have any tech troubles, put that in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that throughout the night, all of our DEQ staff. So you can just put it in there and we'll be able to respond to you that way. We have an unmute function as well. Right now, all of our attendees virtually will be muted the whole time, but you can use that little arrow down at the bottom. And if you're having trouble hearing us at any point, double click on that one and make sure that your speakers are coming out of the right output there. And right now we ask if you can hear us okay to just maybe put something in the Q&A. Just give us a little hi, hello, yes, can hear you. Just want to make sure that you guys are good there.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yes, they can hear us.
If anybody has any questions about how to use your tech throughout the night, let us know. But otherwise, I think we'll move forward. Click on the screen. So this is what our today's agenda is going to cover. First, we did some of our introductions. We have a few videos meeting goals to go over for you. We're gonna go over what we've covered so far in our planning process for climate planning with DEQ. If any of you are familiar with that effort, if not, we're gonna cover that for you tonight. And then we're going to move into what we are currently doing and why we've asked you here tonight, which is the biggest thing, our comprehensive climate action plan through DEQ. So we'll spend a little bit of time just going over some of the bolts of that and make sure that you guys are aware of what we're doing. But then the majority of our meeting tonight is really going to be focused on community input and discussion. We want to hear from all of you that are here tonight. And so we'll move into that for the bulk of our presentation. If that sounds good to everybody, does that sound good to you guys all in the room? Okay, perfect, we'll move forward. So today we're gonna start with our video. You should be able to just click on the video and play. It might be a little laggy for you online, but if so, we have full document in the chat.
Interest in cleaner air for all, reliable and affordable clean energy, and improved resilience from increased storms, floods, and a changing climate. The Virginia Department of Quality is taking steps to meet these challenges through a climate pollution reduction grant from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. This grant consists of two parts: climate action planning and implementation projects. In March 2024, DEQ released the Virginia Priority Climate Action Plan. This plan identified innovative and high-impact projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over 5 years. DEQ based the plan on the 2020 greenhouse gas inventory and input from Virginian communities, stakeholders, and the public. Now, as part of the second part in this process, DEQ will build off the shorter-term plan by developing a comprehensive climate action plan. This is a longer-term statewide plan that will identify and evaluate potential actions to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions over 25 years. This plan will also look at existing goals and requirements for reducing climate pollution. In July 2024, the EPA awarded Virginia almost $200 million worth of funding for projects to reduce methane emissions and enhance Virginia's natural habitats. Now you may ask, how does this impact me? Cleaner air is good for everyone. Reducing extreme climate impacts such as floods and storms also helps us have a better overall quality of life. Now, DEQ wants to hear from you. DEQ wants to understand how your community goals might align with efforts to reduce climate pollution by 2050. There are many sectors to consider when addressing climate pollution. Let's look at each one. Transportation, industry, electric power, buildings, waste and wastewater, agriculture, and forestry and natural lands. So, what are the climate pollution challenges in your community? And how can that information be used to develop solutions to help your community and communities across Virginia? You can share your thoughts on reducing climate pollution in Virginia through the updated DEQ Community Survey. Scan the QR code or visit this link to provide your input today. For more information on the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant and to view any upcoming events, visit deq.virginia.gov/CPRG or email our team at cprg@deq.virginia.gov. Let's work together to protect and improve air quality for the well-being of all Virginians.
Awesome. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of what we've done so far and sort of a brief overview of our comprehensive climate action plan. So we're going to start off talking a little bit about our meeting goals for tonight. But first, I wanted to see from any of you guys in the room or from any of our online participants, how many of you are sort of familiar already with the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant or the Priority Climate Action Plan, or even the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. Lots of different words here, but has anybody been engaged with DEQ in any of those processes so far? Any reason we have no, not so much? Yeah, that's great. And then if you have online, you can, in our Q&A, maybe say yes or no. Okay. We'll let you guys throw those into the chat as we think about it. But so if you're not, there's no problem. We're just going to go over all of that tonight anyways. But thank you for being here. So ultimately tonight, we really want to gain local feedback on what really matters to you when we talk about climate pollution and climate action and emission reduction strategies. We're going to talk about a few more technical terms. We're going to try and keep it pretty baseline, but if you need to reference anything that we're talking about throughout the night, like greenhouse gases, different climate action words, We've created a glossary, terms and summaries, so you can always reference those handouts throughout the night. And we have that handout link that we can throw in the chat as well, might already be in there. So feel free to go through that if you need help guiding you through these conversations tonight as well. Ultimately, though, local and community input is really critical to our plan. We're going to be receiving a lot of input from various stakeholders, but we're really hoping through these community listening sessions that we're having throughout January and all the way into February to gain those insights on what really matters to community members when we talk about emission reduction strategies. And this will all be sort of comprehensively combined into the climate action plan that will be due in December of this year. So ultimately, we're going to talk about climate action in communities, but what are these benefits when we do engage in climate action work and emission reduction strategies? There's many. Some of the bigger ones, though, that you might see or might want to see in your community are things like protected and restored natural spaces, like improving green spaces. We also talked about air quality a lot and the public health benefits there of reducing local air pollution. Increased energy efficiency in homes and buildings is a big one because that often correlates to cost savings for the end user. And then sort of the big one that a lot of people talk about when you talk about climate change or climate action is reduced risks from extreme weather. In Virginia, we see that through increased flooding, or our coastal zones are at risk from rising sea levels or increased flooding there, but also extreme heat is another one. We also, throughout the comprehensive climate action plan, are going to be talking about workforce development opportunity and what that can look like for communities. And then another one, transportation. That's a very big sector in Virginia that produces a lot of emissions. So some benefits there would be increasing mobility of public transit options. So that's just something to get your minds flowing as we start these conversations. But to give you a brief overview of the priority climate action plan, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Eva.
Hello, everyone. I'm April O'Bain. I've been on the climate pollution reduction grant team here at DEQ for a year and a half now, and I'm our greenhouse gas inventory specialist. But I'm going to give you a brief overview of the CCAP process we went through, which stands for Priority Climate Action Plan, which you already gained a little bit of an overview for, but I'm going to dive into a little bit of the outreach we did. We solicited input through webinars, through online meetings, through in-person meetings, through online submissions to our email, and through our survey. Our PCAP survey received 322 responses from 171 unique zip codes throughout the Commonwealth. And from the input we received, we were able to identify some priorities for the residents in Virginia that responded to our survey. Our respondents wanted more renewable energy sources in their communities, more green spaces, and better public transportation and active transportation. And some of the biggest priorities as to benefits from these actions, the respondents really prioritized clean air, transportation improvements, and resilient communities. Some of the barriers for the respondents individually, what prevents them from reducing emissions, is a high cost of energy efficient alternatives and limited access to transit alternatives. But lastly, the greatest opportunities that they saw and ways to implement greenhouse gas emission reduction is through government incentives or policies and through community union. In the PCAP, we created 10 priority measures or meaning actions that can be done in the Commonwealth to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Here they're shown by sector, so I'll just give one example from each sector so you have an idea of what a measure could be. So for example, electrifying cars could be one in the transportation sector, increasing building energy efficiency in the building sector, replacing materials with low carbon materials for the industrial sector. For the electric power sector, to improve energy efficiency and use more renewable energy sources. For natural and working lands, to protect agricultural, forested lands, wetlands and other habitats and tribal lands. And for waste and wastewater sector to reduce, for example, to capture methane from landfills and water treatment centers. Okay, so I promise this is important and not just a lot of numbers. Air quality inventories are very important because it shows us where we are today and what our starting point is so that we can make goals and targets for where we want our emissions to be in the future. This inventory covers all economic sectors in Virginia, and it also covers all the greenhouse gases, which includes carbon dioxide, methane, fluorinated gases, and nitrous oxide. But for the sake of a little bit of simplicity, it's presented here in million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And as you can see, we do have have an overwhelmingly largest emitting sector, which is transportation sector. Of the transportation sector, over half of that is half of those emissions are from actually passenger cars and passenger trucks, so passenger vehicles. And our second most emitting sector is electric power, which is the process of emissions from the generation of electricity at energy generating stations, known as power plants. And this also includes the electricity that has been used by the industrial sector and the commercial sector and the residential sector. So this is just a different way of looking at the inventory to separate the electric power sector. Yes.
Just for clarification, you're
Yes.
talking about electric power covering power plants, and what's the difference with energy production activities, just for clarification?
Okay, yes, energy production activities, that includes emissions from coal mining, emissions from natural gas extraction or wells, and the transmission and distribution.
Okay, I see this.
Yeah, of course. And so our gross total for 2021, which is the most recent comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory we have, the gross total is almost 146 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. But on the bright side, natural lands in Virginia do offset about a third of our emissions. It reduces our net total emissions to just be a little over 93 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. Any questions on the inventory or our PCAP outreach or process?
Statewide. That was statewide.
Yes, statewide. But we are, or for the PCAP process or for the inventory?
Yeah.
Yes. We are hoping in the coming years that we'll be able to start working on local greenhouse gas inventories.
We do have a question online as well, asking how does this compare with nearby states?
Yeah, I'm thinking I don't have any inventory data in mind. I think we are fairly similar to surrounding states like North Carolina. We're probably have a little more emissions than, say, Maryland, because Maryland has a longer history of control programs, GHG control programs than we do. I'm thinking elsewhere. West Virginia is still a fairly large GHG producer because they are still a major user of coal in generating electricity. So they probably have larger emissions, and so does more than likely Kentucky and Tennessee for the same reason. Is there updated data? Here, go ahead.
And then our next question here online, I think asks for maybe, Jeremy, you might, if you don't mind, maybe clarifying your question, but if I am reading it correctly, feel free to just correct me. But our total million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent as compared to our net million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent.
Please go back a slide. Yes, so our gross emissions are all of the greenhouse gases that are emitted. And then forestry and land use sinks, that's where the natural lands naturally sequester carbon. So that offsets the overall emissions in Virginia to 93.
And then our next question is asking, is there updated data past 2021? So clarifying that this data is from 2021 and if there's anything else updated since then.
Yes, it is from 2021. Unfortunately, the tool we use in order to get a comprehensive idea, it takes a little while for all of that data to become available for all states. And we use an EPA, we use a state inventory tool to develop to develop our greenhouse gas inventories. So actually, fortunately, the 2022 tool just came out, so it will take us a while to develop our side of it for all the Virginia specific sources, but hopefully that will come out soon. But all inventories are unfortunately a little bit.
And the reason for it, just a little more elaboration, the reason is that the state inventory tool relies heavily on federal data that is published, usually has a 1 or 2 year lag in being published at least. So you have to have that data available from places like the Energy Information Administration. Then EPA gets the data and works it into the state inventory tool. So it just adds a little bit more lag into it. So that's why you see that usually 2 year delay in getting an inventory out.
And it has to be peer reviewed. So luckily the time does make it more solid data, but.
And then our next question here is, have our greenhouse gases been going up or down over the last several years?
Okay, well, several years. If we look at from, I do have a graph on this, and Jeremy, I can send it. I can send it to you.
We've had a slide similar to that. Between 2005 and 2000, I think it was 2021, we've had about a 19% decrease in overall GHG emissions.
I think also on the handout, I'll reference this really quickly. There is a graphic of sort of what our emissions might look like projected into the future. That's not necessarily quantified. It's more just an idea of what would happen if no climate action was taken, no emission reduction strategies were taken, sort of how that those projections of those emissions could look like in the next 25 years or so, up until 2050. Are there any other questions?
That's it for now.
Yes, I'm kind of curious how we determine what areas of forestry or land use are sinks.
It's mostly relying on Forest Service data. It's a lot of federal data for land use. Unfortunately, even though it's the biggest, the biggest sector, negative sector, we don't have the best data for it. So it's really using a lot of geospatial data and so it's not, it's quantified as best as it can based on like Virginia forests, but we also have a hard time quantifying the, urban areas, like the urban trees and parks and where that comes in. So hypothetically, it could be even more sequestration.
And one of the keys that fits into the whole planning exercise going forward is changes in land use, obviously, are going to have an impact on that ability of natural lands to sequester, either positively or negatively. So that's something we have to factor in as part of this whole planning process.
Yeah. And something interesting is agricultural lands because, they are natural lands, so they can sequester carbon in the soil. However, with ag soils that are treated and it ends up actually almost canceling out for those emissions.
All right, I think we're good to move forward.
Well, hello again. My name is Julia Wack. Just want to thank you all for being here. And we are going to build off of our primary climate action plan conversation and kind of move ahead to frame our conversation today about the comprehensive climate action plan. First, to just generally define what a comprehensive climate action plan is. We're looking at building out a longer term plan for the state of Virginia and see how we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions over a 25-year period as opposed to the primary climate action plan. The comprehensive plan will also include more elements than was included in the primary plan. So we're going to include a statewide emissions inventory, which Ava just showed you, and we're also going to use that inventory to basically create a quote unquote business as usual scenario and just kind of take a look at what future projections might look like should no actions be taken. With both of those things in mind, we're also going to set economy-wide emission reduction targets. And in order to better settle those targets realistically, we are going to come up with potential emission reduction strategies and funding opportunities. And that's really where our engagement comes in. And we really look to statewide partnerships and local community members to help us think of potential measures that they would like to see in the state of Virginia. In addition, there will also be several analyses that are a part of the comprehensive climate action plan. One of which will look at air quality, one of which will be a comprehensive workforce analysis, looking at potential benefits and disbenefits, and other community impacts as well. So who's providing input on the plan? We are here today for our first community listening session. So we are looking forward to kicking off our general public engagement. We also have a stakeholder group that basically is a compilation of different partners that represent various economic sectors across Virginia, as well as community-based organizations. And then we are also going to have an interagency state working group. We're going to coordinate with localities, various regions that also receive planning grants. Those are Plan RVA, the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission, as well as the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. In addition, the Monacan Indian Nation also received funding for climate planning as well. So we'll be looking forward to coordinating with those regional efforts and seeing how they can be larger situated within the state plan. We will also be having a focus on a low-income disadvantaged community analysis as prescribed by the EPA, and this is a primary focus of the CPRG program. So looking at our engagement plan, I'm just going to go over a brief timeline. So in October, this was really when we kicked off the CCAP process. And so we held 2 webinars, just kind of describing the planning process ahead. And in November and December, we began our stakeholder group engagement. For those of you who are interested in all of the participating organizations in our stakeholder group on our website, we do have a link to every participating organization member and their affiliation as well. And then here we are in the spring. So we have lots of engagement activities coming up. Right now, we're hosting our first community listening session. 5 additional sessions will be held across the state, and those will also have virtual participation options as well. We're going to continue our stakeholder group engagement through March. We are also going to continue that regional group engagement and make sure that we're actively just involved with what those other regional plans are doing in terms of their public engagement and making sure that we're collaboratively planning based on the insights that they give us and the insights that we give them in this process. And looking forward into later in the spring, we will also be having our interagency coordination group, and this will just allow various state agencies that also have a vested interest in this plan to just collaborate and realize what types of authority might be necessary to implement some of the measures that will end up in the final comprehensive climate action plan. And it will also help us just align potential funding opportunities and just make sure that all of our state agencies are on the same page. We also look forward to having LIDAC engagement. Just to elaborate a bit on that, LIDAC is a term that stands for low income and disadvantaged communities. That is an emphasis of the CPRG program and the Environmental Protection Agency. And basically the Environmental Protection Agency has created a national data set to help various regions and states identify potential areas that face different climate and environmental health impacts and how we can better engage them in the plan. So we will also be having some additional meetings for specific to LIDAC engagement and just more generalized events that we will be tabling. We also will be reaching out to the 6 other federally recognized tribes that are not the Monacan Indian Nation who's already received their planning grant to try to implement them in this process as well. So looking ahead at what's left for the rest of the year after the spring, we will be tentatively closing our community survey at the end of April so that sometime in the early May timeframe, we can begin drafting our first version of the comprehensive climate action plan. In the fall timeframe, we will be doing more public engagement to present what we have come up with, and we will be receiving feedback and implementing that into the finalized version of the plan, which will be submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency in December. And if there are any questions on this planning process, the engagement timeline, the comprehensive climate action plan more generally, you can feel free to drop those in the chat, or any in-person attendees, you can just let me know if you have a question.
Julie, you might want to mention where they can find proceedings on the meetings and webinars that we've already had.
Right, so just a little background, and I will also drop this in the chat. Our CPRG webpage, there is a calendar of events that's kind of like a subpage, but if you look through the page, there are these different widgets. So there are these closed boxes based on topics of interest. So for example, if you were looking for the stakeholder list, you would look under the stakeholder group. If you were looking for, I know we have different documentation. We have our public participation guide available online. We also have monthly newsletters that you can sign up for that are external facing, and those are sent out monthly. And those will include more information on different meetings and meeting dates. And then if you look at the bottom of our webpage, we also have a webinar widget where you can pop that open and see all of the webinars and information for previous meetings related to the priority climate action plan, as well as the comprehensive climate action plan.
We had a couple questions come in. The first one was dealing, can you elaborate on projections data later in the presentation? Should we ask questions now? I mentioned we could probably bring up, we have at least one slide that touches on projections that we can get to once the presentation is over and go through that. Second question is, has there been any shift in EPA's timeline or expectations based on leadership change? And the answer to that is not that we are aware of. The deadline that is in our grant is still to have our final product, the CCAP, submitted to EPA by December 1. That's it for now.
We can go ahead and move forward to our discussion, and I'm going to pass it off to Allison as well.
So thank you for going through that and for listening to us, talk at you. So now's the time for us to have more of a discussion. For those of you that came in late, we have some materials over there if you want them or need to reference them. This is really going to be more community and discussion based. And so ultimately we want to know a few things from you because we have a small enough group in person. We're just going to keep this as a larger discussion. No need breaking you guys up. But these are a couple of things that we are asking for input on as we're developing the comprehensive climate action plan. These similar questions can be found in our form as well as our community survey, which we'll cover in just a second. So if you feel like you need to think about these things a little bit more after our discussion or want to continue to provide input and haven't engaged in that survey yet, there's still ample opportunity to share your thoughts. But for tonight, if you want to go through these questions, maybe if you want to think about them for a second before we start talking about them, but ultimately what we want to know is which sectors are most important to you when reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So for example, maybe transportation or agriculture, and maybe for a reason why, maybe you have a personal reason or if you have a concern or thought community-based within that sector that you want to talk about. We'll record those thoughts. We also are curious what specific actions you might already be taking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or maybe that are already happening in your community that you're able to take advantage of. Maybe, you have a local composting facility, or maybe use public transit, things like that to get your brain flowing there. And if you're having trouble thinking of ideas, this is supposed to be collaborative, so we can, talk about these things together. And we also are curious what barriers might be preventing you or your community as a whole from reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Maybe it's costs, maybe it's accessibility to different renewable energy sources, things like that. So larger picture, or it can just be you personally, maybe you don't have a recycling bin, things like that. So we can talk about those things as well. But if you guys have any thoughts as well online, feel free, similar as you've always been doing, put them in the Q&A section and we'll record your thoughts and try to answer them as best we can too.
This is also just a small side note, for anyone that's looking for more sector-specific definitions or background information. You should also have in your handouts, a list of commonly used terms and acronyms, and those should be defined, within the term list as well.
Not yet. While you're thinking, I will take the, hopefully I can do it. I'm gonna fast forward for a second. Oops, you don't have the rest of the slides. Never mind.
I can find the slide, maybe they.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was simply relating to the question about emission projections. We do have emission projections, both what we call default projections for Virginia, which again are mainly based on national data sets. They show a slight increase in emissions over time, out to 2050. We're in the process with our consultant in developing what we're calling a Virginia-specific business as usual projection scenario, which accounts for more Virginia-specific types of data. Some of you may be aware that we are seeing a very large increase in electricity demand in Virginia because of the preponderance of data centers and growth in data center sector, which we're going to have to account for in this business Virginia-specific scenario. We're also looking at using specific data from our Department of Transportation on their projections in terms of transportation growth. So that is currently underway, and we should have that will be something that will go into the draft plan and it will kind of the Virginia specific BAU will be what we then use as a starting point to then factor in additional measures, potential measures and strategies to further reduce emissions.
Are you just looking for the,
That trends graph. Yes, sir.
I'm curious if the scope of this is just emissions produced within the state of Virginia, or is it pollution that may be produced by Virginians, including that data centers you plug into the grid? It might not be that we need things created in Virginia, it might be created in West Virginia, and Carolina, but it's driven by industry and within Virginia.
Right. The focus is, since it's a state plan, is really the emissions that are being generated within the Commonwealth, within the borders of the Commonwealth. We are, for various other reasons, looking at that. Another component of that is what you're speaking to is what kind of imported power are we bringing into the state to support that demand. And that's all something that will be looked at as part of the plan, and we will be doing a number of analyses, including power sector analyses, to see, one, what does that demand look like based on the most recent projections, and two, how is that demand going to be met and still be able to meet the goals in terms of emission reductions in the power sector, like the Virginia Clean Economy Act and other federal and state statutes. So that will be factored. That will have to be part of the analysis that we do.
I'm not sure if it'll open.
I'm sort of curious off of that,
you know, mentioned data centers, and that's obviously a really big part of our future planning for energy demand because of how many are coming. Their energy demand is. And there have been efforts that have been ongoing for several years now from environmental advocacy groups to try to get, laws passed. For those data centers to be responsible for their own energy generation.
Mhm.
Energy to be generated from clean energy sources. And those have struggled to like succeed. So I'm kind of curious for clarification on what the CCAP will look like in terms of like, if the aim is to be reducing greenhouse gas emissions, then you know, does DEQ have the tools to you know, impose controls? Or is it gonna be more of a like, this is a plan that we can hope that like partners will opt into? I'm kind of curious what that like plan is.
Yeah, just to summarize online in case the people online couldn't hear. So the question was, starting off with, you know, looking at data centers and their energy consumption and how that's really expanding and is expected to expand, and sort of the binding nature of the plan. So looking at either whether the energy sector or other sectors, if there are going to be actionable items included in the plan to reduce emissions with, you know, data centers or other sectors, or if it's just going to be a combination of sort of goals that the state can implement then to with partners to potentially do. And so the answer to that is sort of the latter. It's not a legally binding plan by any means. So it really is just more of a collaborative effort where we're going to be laying out the baseline framework alongside all of our input from our partners, our interagency partners, how they can incorporate these measures through, you know, various funding resources or a different means of authority, but ultimately not binding at this time.
And the plan also will serve as an education tool, I think, which is important in itself, to show us where we're gonna be in terms of those things that are on the books and how they're gonna, even if they don't reduce emissions, or how are they going to shave some of that increase emissions based on that electricity demand growth.
Yeah.
And then it can be used, and hopefully it can be hand off to people who, if they want to turn it into actionable items in the future. So I was just gonna, we now have the slide that I was thinking of.
Is it shared also with my share screen?
Yes, it is. I think. Can virtual participants just let me know if they're able to see this graph? No? Okay. I thought it was on ClickShare, but I don't.
So might be able to hopefully that's better.
I guess I'm more tech challenged.
Let's see here. No, not able to see it. All right. All right, we'll stop sharing, share my screen. All right, I think we're good.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
All right, so this is a slide that does two things. It actually shows you the historical data that we talked about earlier on the left-hand side of the graph. And this is done by sector, as you can see, the legends over there on the right-hand side of the graph. Historical trends are out there until that dotted line, and that's where that about 19% reduction has come from 2005 to 2021. Then the tool that we're using to develop inventories will also project emissions out to the future, and those the more shaded lines are those going out to 2050. And that's the default inventory that I mentioned earlier, based mainly on national data. What we're currently doing, as I mentioned with the contractor, is to update those emission projections with more Virginia-specific data, which will change that those emission trajectories in some way. So that's what we have right now. We do not have a formal Virginia-specific BAU yet, but we should have that in the next month or so. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, the dip in the blue at the top, looks like a dip around 2021 in the transportation sector. Do we have a number on how much that was in terms of total transportation emissions during lockdown?
Don't know for sure. We probably can pull those numbers out. We just don't have them handy, but we do have all those numbers that made that graph. And that is because of the COVID, situation. But as you can see, emissions vary from year to year, even in the historical, based on economic, upturns, downturns, and other factors. That's why the projections are a nice smooth, line, which, because you can't really predict what's gonna happen in the future, other than increase in either demand or travel or whatever.
Are these gross or net emissions?
Those are all gross emissions. We did nothing, that whole sequestered sink information is not really factored into those numbers.
Is this program planning to account for that at some point?
Yeah, in fact, we did have we did our 2021 inventory slide, that may be in one of the handouts.
Yes, we covered that a little bit. I'll go over that
Okay.
really quickly one more time and, sorry, change the screen back here so you guys can take a look at that. Sorry to all of you guys online switching back and forth here. Thank you for being flexible. Let's see. All right. All right.
You got it.
Perfect. Yeah, so this is sort of what this looks like here. I am not our greenhouse gas inventory specialist, but I can go over all of this in detail because I did not put it together. But what this looks like is essentially these are all of the different sectors that we're looking at and how we quantify them. And then that's our gross total at the end there. And then we do account for land use sinks or forestry sinks, subtract that from the gross total, and then we get our net total of around 93 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And so there's different types of greenhouse gases, and some, have different weights. And so we sort of, carbon dioxide equivalent is how we sort of combine all of those into one number for you.
And that's how we factor in the sink capability of natural lands in Virginia. And that may come into play. One of the scenarios that is kind of driven by existing statute is there's a energy policy goal of going to net carbon zero by 2045. So we would do at least one of the scenarios in the plan. We'll look at that, what it would take to meet that goal. And we would factor in again that's the sink numbers into that analysis as well.
Maybe we can move back to the
Yeah.
discussion question, if there's anything else there. So these are some of the questions that we had covered. We also have another slide with more of a specific question. We've sort of talked about this a little bit already, but on the next slide, we are looking also at capturing sort of emission reduction measures that you think are important to you, that you want to be considered or hope to be considered in the plan. Maybe you wish were in place in your community, that you would like to see, or maybe you'd like to see more of, maybe you just wanted to see expanded for different reasons. If, maybe there's a barrier to that for you right now. So if you have any thoughts there, we would love to hear them. We maybe want to think about it as well and, record those thoughts at a later time. We have, the discussion questions on the paper. If you want to fill it out there, we can collect those, or, we have our email and everything. You can submit those too. But just curious if you have any thoughts there, sort of what matters to you there, and how we can capture that feedback to make sure that your voice is being heard. If there's anybody online too, we didn't forget about you guys too. So we'll keep an eye on that chat there.
They were lost the chat points.
You want to literally fill out the sticky notes?
I actually didn't explain this very well. We can, if you want to, be a very small group tonight. So this was more if we were expecting to have a little bit of a larger participating audience. So if you want to fill out things on sticky notes, you can. Otherwise, we can just have a discussion about them. But let us know. We can pass them out for you guys too. So it's up to you. Anyone would like sticky notes? Yeah.
I can just throw out like one specific measure. I know it's politically unpalatable, but it really seems that like if we had data that showed that nobody is commuting, what our air quality impacts are, like encouraging telework to reduce the
Right.
Yeah.
you seems to make a ton of sense.
Especially since like a lot of industries have been pushing really hard to reduce telework options recently, despite the fact that it's very popular with workers and it has a measurable benefit. I know that like I have been fortunate to retain flexibility in whether or not I have to commute in or work from home, but then there has been a lot of like implicit pressure to be in the office, which I think is a shared experience across a lot of people. So like my specific group has been, like, we have all been relatively on the same page of like, this is something that matters to us, like that flexibility, to kind of like work from home or to be in the office is important, but, yeah, I think that like policies that continue to encourage that are things that have measurable benefits, both from a social perspective and also from an environmental perspective.
Come on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, especially because like, one of the things that I was gonna say is just that, like transportation is a huge contributor to pollutants. And like, I would love to have a way to get to my work that isn't relying on a passenger vehicle, but like, that's just not really a reality for me. Richmond is but so, transversible by bus. Like, I think I could technically get to work and it would take 2 hours. Which I'm not gonna do.
Right.
So yeah, I think that like opportunities to strengthen our public transit so that we have the opportunity to choose that option would be great. Because, you know, there is, but so far like the built environment supports that usage unless you're willing to like spend a lot of time doing it. Which obviously like for me, the only impact is time because I have a car, but for people who don't have cars, that is like it is a decision on where you get to go across the city as well. So that's another thing that has a lot of like social benefits and has measurable environmental benefits.
And I think there are cascading impacts as well. Like if we're understanding that at minimum, you know, like our systems are designed around sort of the human radius with a car, which is going to be about 45 minutes. So like that's about as far as you can go with a car, and that's sort of the default. People are assuming that you're leaving your house to go do these things, and then all the things that are associated with that really contributes to our greenfield development. So we're bulldozing a lot of those wetlands. You know, Henrico County is all set to bulldoze 600 acres of swamp for a data center. You know, like that's not the most comparable example, but certainly for like neighborhoods and other development that is really, really impacting a lot of those wetlands. So we're thinking about these cascading effects of we're destroying some of the land that could be offsetting our emissions. We're really seeing a lot of that sprawling greenfield development because of this transportation radius that we have artificially created. So if we made it possible to like get everything you needed within a 10-minute walk of your house because you aren't expected to leave your house for that 20 to 30 minute, 45-minute drive every day, things change. So I really, you know, maybe we don't have the modeling in place right now to understand it. But in terms of like what we could look at, modeling the knock-on effects of not just not you, but other things in that giant part of that.
Yeah, and as someone who lives without a car and has to live and die by the transit system, expansions in it would be very important economically and ecologically. Like there's a lot of people whose job opportunities are restrained by the fact that transit systems just don't go out very far in the state of Virginia. And, you know, there's that need to cut down on the amount of travel. It needs to happen with protections for work from home. But yeah, just as someone who only can take transit places and literally cannot get here without someone giving them a ride. You know, it's important to see that expansion of like frequency, outreach, quality of service. Like we've seen, like, for example, in Richmond with the Pulse DRT line, once you get services like that, they're immensely popular. They offset a lot of journeys that could happen by private passenger vehicles.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, compounding positives that improve life for everyone and cut down on emissions, and it's very important. I feel like to promote those kinds of like transit expansions with, DRT lines, overhead wire buses, I think are an important thing that we'll also want to see, light rail expansion. Heavy rail expansion also for when people need to like get between cities, electrification, just generally for transit systems. So, there's a lot that could be done, especially in conjunction with like improved walkability, like with the 10-minute radius of like, walkability for like important day-to-day services and things like that, like ability networks, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and all the, like, has social and environmental benefits, like, I wish I had something specific that I could say, like, this thing, but like, there has been plenty of work done on the social benefits of being able to walk to get a lot of the things that you need, in terms of like building connections with people who live in your neighborhood, being able to like get more movement in, or reduce the kind of like sedentary lifestyle stuff that like having to drive everywhere continues to trend. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to that. I love living in Chocolate and being able to like walk to lots of places.
Yeah.
It made it feel like it was a neighborhood of its own, because it was like, oh, I can walk to get breakfast, and on the way I can check out a cool pottery shop, and like there, which also has economic benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like moving to around, I kind of live near Scouts Addition now. It's cool because I'm right next to a grocery store, which is fantastic.
That
I walk
helps.
to that and use it all the time. But like, it is a lot more cut off from, more of the kind of social stuff, because I'm on the intersection of two big roads. They're kind of those islanded in that way.
And it varies from place to place too, because we got on to Manchester and the south side. They don't have any, there's no grocery stores there.
Right.
That's where I live, it's, not great.
Which is like a shame, because there are cool apartment buildings going up around.
Yes,
But there's no grocery store.
Yeah.
So it's like, when you're considering potentially moving there, it's like, oh, well, there might be a cool place to live, but like, you're asking me again to do the big giant drive.
or you're paying somebody to, you're spending a lot more to be able to do it. And that's, again, it varies very much from area to area.
Yeah.
And because there is no,
Also the zoning issue, and I know that thankfully Richmond is reworking its zoning code, but it would be good to see like the diversification of like neighborhoods and
Yeah.
increased walkability, and also just from a budgetary standpoint, in the long term, it's a lot cheaper to support these public transit networks and like walkable neighborhoods and protected bike lane networks, rather than automobile infrastructure, which has to be repaired quite frequently just because of the nature of multi-ton private vehicles driving all the time and wearing down roads really fast. It's a bit more of an upfront infrastructure investment, but over the long run, budgetarily, it's better, economically, it's better.
And when we talk about incentivizing telework, like I appreciate that you referenced City of Richmond zoning ordinance. So like right now, City of Richmond and Henrico County, and to my knowledge, Chesterfield all have extremely restricted home business zoning
Yeah.
ordinances that really don't allow people to work from home. So like, would anybody ever know if you're running your tax accountant business out of your home? Maybe not, but then
Yeah.
it's a very important white collar, blue collar divide, where like someone cannot have a hair braiding business in their home. That would be illegal under the zoning code, but they can run their tax accounting business out of their home as long as they don't have more than 4 cars per day stop by. So like, that's where you have very, very classist and sometimes otherwise demographically suspect ordinances that would prevent any kind of business activity. But at the same time, we have mixed use zoning, we have efforts at densification that already ask people to live next to for a commercial above a mixed use. We're already asking that, but at the same time, we have very, very, very entrenched local laws that would prevent anyone living in, say, a residential neighborhood or a single family residential zone area from being able to combine any functions whatsoever. Again, being a part of it. And then just another zoning issue is that when we think about agriculture, a lot of our localities
go above and beyond to make any kind of agricultural activities really, really difficult. And Ranko County in particular has a lot of laws, ordinances on the books that are in direct conflict with state law regarding the right to farm act, still on the books. And so it's like, I have 10 acres. I would not be allowed to have single chicken on my 10 acres under Henrico's zoning rules. And so state law notwithstanding. So, but this is the kind of restrictive stuff where the county is really trying hard to get rid of agriculture, green uses of our property, things that are going to be lighter on the land than intense development. And there are tax structures that back this, right, where localities' incomes depend on rising property values. So there's systemic incentives to get rid of green space in our, especially suburban communities.
Loosely, loosely tack onto that. You know, if you look at it around irrigation system of the county, you kind of have land plus improvements, and improvements being built structured on top. So when we think about, it's kind of a question before about net versus gross emissions, that incentive structure that it's land plus improvements, or chasing the plus improvements, devalues the ability of the forested or agriculture land to change the net versus gross balance. So I think I would really enjoy some sort of, it'd be great, some sort of ecosystem services or some sort of model to value forested land, marshland, agriculture, some agricultural land, depending that the services that you provide possibly as carbon sinks, as opposed to, well, it's just land and we should go up and improve it. The incentive structure there is then to improve it and reduce that value and reduce that balance in terms of greenhouse gas removal.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like ways to elucidate how valuable undeveloped land is, given how, like I said, how entrenched the idea of development, the economically viable thing, is kind of like in the structure of how we consider, how we're, I don't know, how we're developing or not developing.
Yeah. I can touch on like the maybe the wetlands part a little bit, and just maybe give some background of sort of how those efforts might preliminarily be starting. So we talked about the climate pollution reduction grant. So that was the planning grant that we received to do this comprehensive climate action plan and then the priority climate action plan. But they also, the Environmental Protection Agency had competitive funds for states, regional groups and tribes to apply for. And DEQ received two grants to implement some emission reduction projects. And so we have some methane projects that we're looking or working on right now. And that will be up until 2029. And then we're also a part of a multi-state coalition called the Atlantic Conservation Coalition. So it's us, North Carolina, South Carolina, Maryland, I think that's all. And then we have the Nature Conservancy as well. And we're all working to restore wetlands across multiple states, but we have 10 projects that we're working on that we've identified and are looking at their restoration value and hoping to, begin implementing those projects and starting that work up until 2029 is when the funding ends. So that's one effort that we're working on right now. I don't know if you wanted to speak more to the ACC, but just a brief overview, but we're still capturing all these other ideas as well, but just wanted to maybe reference that for some consideration.
Yeah, and I just very briefly follow up on that. I think one of the things we would like to do is point out those implementation grants that we're getting and the benefits from them, and at least make recommendations as to how those types of programs could be expanded. Not necessarily, identifying how that would be done or how they would be funded, but just to say that there's an opportunity if a way can be found to do that.
And looking at and how those projects, like you had mentioned as well, not just the economic benefit of those projects, but the social, the larger scale environmental benefit of restoring and conserving these wetlands that are so vital to our ecosystems, what that looks like holistically. And yeah, like mentioned, not just from the economic perspective. So
For sure.
that's a big part of what we're going to hopefully be doing, right? We partner with, different agencies. So a lot of these things we talk about, like transportation, housing, DEQ may not have the authority to implement or adapt to all these things, but, we have these really strong relationships with our agencies. And so, all of this that, we gather, we can distribute that information widely too.
We do have a question in the chat.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you've been watching that, following this.
Yes, Jeremy is asking, what kind of authority does DEQ have over vehicle travel?
You're
Is it a
here.
realistic expectation that DEQ pass any regulations on metrics like VMT, vehicle miles traveled?
Yeah, we unfortunately, as in DEQ, do not have much authority in the way of controlling mobile sources. Much of that is preempted by the federal government through their emissions standards and fuel standards and things like that. We do have an inspection and maintenance program up in Northern Virginia, and it was driven by the Clean Air Act that keeps vehicles on the road cleaner than they would be otherwise. But we cannot on our own implement our own standards for vehicles or trucks or that sort of thing. Same thing would be, I'm pretty sure same thing would apply for VMP.
I'd just add, though, that the state does have the authority to provide incentives in some
Yeah.
way, shape, or form. I'm not sure what they would be. We'd certainly be open to suggestions. We can do incentives. We can't regulate tailpipe emissions, and I don't think we could ever regulate VMT. I think that'd be an extremely difficult play, even if we had legal authority to do so. But incentives, the state certainly can come up with those.
Would it be possible for the state to implement certain taxes to promote certain kinds of vehicles? Like, I know some localities have taxes based off of the weight of the vehicle to try to encourage people to get lighter cars. As I'm sure everyone knows, there's an epidemic of giant tanks on the road that eat up gasoline. Yeah, and it would be nice to see if it was possible, some taxes that might encourage smaller cars in tandem with like regulations that actually allow for like these sorts of lighter vehicles,
I guess all we could say is that the state has the authority to pass taxes. Here again,
That's a legislative function.
that would be a legislative function.
The thing I would add, though, is that on the federal level, they've just released greenhouse gas emission standards for light and medium duty vehicles, which does indirectly push things to more efficient and theoretically smaller vehicles. Also pushes it, the fleet more to electric and hybrids. So that is there now. We'll see how those regulations fare. But that's,
Situation, it's hard to have faith in that sort of thing.
but again, that's all, we're factoring in those kinds of federal mandates right now into what we're doing with the clear understanding that, well, if things change, we're gonna have to change our analyses as well.
Right?
So in thinking about our incentives, one of the challenges we've had was say solar, especially distributed solar.
Yeah.
That puts it on their own. And we're hearing from our utilities that their demand is increasing enormously, mostly because of data centers. So when I hear all of the above plan, what I don't hear is distributed solar. What I don't hear are the utilities trying to take folks off their books while they're adding new folks on. So really controlling that means of generation in a way that kind of keeps everyone needing energy as opposed to some of our biggest users. So is it possible that we can write into a permitting process as a matter of, say, environmental justice, that, hey, if you're gonna put new energy sources into production, your gas plants, you're gonna put your data centers to where you're gonna need to have diesel generators on site, is it possible that we create an offset program that would encourage distributed solar, especially in fence line communities?
I think absent legislative action on that front, it would be very difficult for us to do something like that regulatorily. I mean, as you know, there's a lot of action going on at the General Assembly right now with respect to data centers, and some of it exactly with respect to what you're mentioning. I don't think those bills are faring too well at the moment. I don't have a complete list, but, I mean, things change.
And the discussion or the subject of distributed generation has been in the in the sessions for for quite a while. So that's, and they just have not gotten over the top, so to speak, for lack of a better word.
It will be in the Senate floor tomorrow.
Which one?
SB 1243, electric utilities, electric distribution infrastructure, serving data centers.
Ah,
SB 1243.
Thank you. I think that is, I mean, I think I'll maybe clarify that, yeah, I definitely respect that this is, a plan that will rely on cooperation, and that isn't necessarily about like finding ways to railroad to an answer. But I think like, in terms of specific emission reduction measures that I wish were in place in my community, distributed solar is absolutely one of them. Because like, I live in an apartment, I don't have the opportunity to even say that I would like to pay for solar. I get the energy that my building is given, right? And the efforts that have taken place so far to attempt to open that opportunity to people who live in apartments have largely fallen flat. Dominion technically has a solar program that you can opt into. I've never been able to find it. I have looked for it. I have not been able to get to the webpage where it exists. And the people who have frequently found that it's more expensive if you want to try to opt into that program, because there isn't an incentive for like Dominion to be interested in that kind of a switch. But like distributed solar would be something that would be so valuable, especially in terms of like community resiliency to outages and things like that. So like that is something that I would really love to see. And that like I would love the opportunity to be able to be a participant in that conversation, because right now, living in a city, anybody who lives in an apartment is basically locked out of that. Like we can't even talk about like tax incentives to get solar onto our roofs because we don't own the roof. So I think like that is absolutely something that I wish were more like, were something that like I had the opportunity to be more part of. That would be like a fun thing to be at school. Especially because there's so much opportunity on apartment buildings, and those rooftops aren't being used for other things. But they frequently aren't, especially the ones like the one that I live in, that's just a converted like industrial building. So I feel like there is a lot of opportunity there for those roofs to be like achieving things and for us to build energy into the density that already exists, which would be really cool.
I think, yeah, maybe, I guess I'll say maybe to be an optimist about our plan is that, as we mentioned, there are maybe challenges in passing things now. That doesn't mean that, any of your ideas tonight aren't going to be captured and, hopefully we can look at these plans and maybe look at that in a longer term thing. Like maybe it's not possible now, but what can, if that is a possibility in the next 10 to 25 years, how can that be quantified and what are those benefits? And so we really hope that that can set that framework. Yeah. So that's just a little bit of optimism from you guys today. Yeah. Was there anything else online that we wanted to reference here?
I think we've got most of them.
I see one question. Of the sectors that DEQ has direct authority over, what would be the highest return for the lowest investment? That is a very good question.
I think that's what we're looking for.
Right.
Exactly that answer, and we're going to be having a modeling done by our consultant, looking as you described earlier. And, yeah, that's the holy grail. So,
Yes.
$1 million question.
Yeah. $1 billion question.
Or the cheapest
Yeah.
possible question.
Yeah.
Yes, we have some analyses that are going to be completed by our subcontractors. And we have a workforce analysis, so that's going to be looking into how the interplay of traditional fossil fuel resources is going to basically just interact with growing renewable energy job projections and potential benefits there within specific communities. And we also will be doing an air quality analysis as well as a community-wide benefits and potential disbenefits analysis, just looking at what potential changes might happen over the next 25 years in terms of greenhouse gases and what that will mean for communities.
So in terms of our understanding of workforce analysis, I know traditionally we've really focused on the green energy sector, but folks who work in fields that are not, there's a lot of folks who work in green energy that aren't necessarily building solar panels. Farmers who need green energy. Folks who are urban farmers, especially potentially leveraging that green energy. Folks who are working in the fields that are going to be delineating wetlands, like solvents of various kinds. Like a lot of times we really focus on green energy jobs as green jobs, but that's not necessarily green job. Green job is so much bigger. Right. So understanding our definition of how we're looking at workforce. If we had more green jobs, if we broaden that category, could be.
Yeah, absolutely.
What she had. But also while we're sharing some ideas, this is unfortunately unrelated. But I did want to mention the idea of tax rebates for electric bikes. I know there's a big push for electric cars in particular, but it would also be good to see the flexibility that e-bikes would bring in urban communities, especially in conjunction with an expansion of protected bike lane networks in cities. I think that would be very helpful in promoting walkability and biking as a mode of transportation, because right now it's pretty dangerous generally. So I could definitely see that as something that would be very helpful in bringing down VMT, perhaps in combination also with like zero emission zones, and maybe even, dare I say, congestion pricing on a limited basis, because it would just be good to see as much as possible this infrastructure in cities oriented around modes of transportation that are emissions light or emission neutral.
And I think, just, kind of merging that idea with the idea of like green jobs, like I do civil engineering, I do software engineering. So like in the broadest sense, like this, I am sort of in a green job. And I think like, I think that this is like a little bit of a storytelling tangent, but in college, I had grand notions of what that was gonna mean. Right, of what it means to go into a job where you are theoretically doing stuff that is environmentally good. And at least in the private sector, like everything is so driven by the contract that you're given by the client, right? So like there isn't really a lot of agency for folks who have technical expertise to like do aggressive environmental stuff unless the client has specific incentives to do so. But like very recently, I was helping a locality with work on the CFPF grants from DCR, which is very cool because it was helping them to get projects that there was already some interest in doing for like, not necessarily environmental reasons. But that like, we were able to direct, like, well, here are ways that like we can be fitting these projects to achieve environmental goals, right? Like these are things that you can do with these opportunities and these challenges that you have. So I think like opportunities to make, to like provide localities incentives to take action is also a very crucial way of like leveraging a workforce that might otherwise like not have a lot of frequency, maybe so like do something like that. I don't know. Grants are good.
Yeah, absolutely.
We like grants.
It's funny.
That is everything.
I might also add just a very out there notion I would personally love to see, but I know it's probably a mite ambitious for this particular department. Railway electrification and expansion of Virginia's railways. We are very tangentially related to the Northeast Corridor, which is an electrified rail network. It'd be good to see Virginia's passenger rail lines that connect to it be electrified. and perhaps expanded to kind of move away automobiles as the main form of transportation between cities. Since a lot of Virginia's urban areas are like close enough to each other that a robust rail network would be able to service them quite easily if it were to be expanded and promoted by the Commonwealth's government agencies and federal agencies. And then electrification is also going to be important for, ensuring that the passenger travel is negligible carbon wise, and ensuring that freight is also negligible carbon wise, because I feel like it's important to also keep in mind the physical distribution of material goods. A lot of that's done by trucks, powered by, fossil fuels, and trucks for delivering those goods are going to be very hard to do with electric means, just based off of the weight requirements. So it would be good to see some sort of a network recommendation focused on expanding this an electrified freight network that delivers things to cities that can then be moved around cities in specific with electric cargo vans, for example. That would be far more practical in certain things. Again, that's a bit ambitious and perhaps a bit out of the purview of this department, but while we're throwing ideas up for recommendation, that is something I would personally like to see.
I think it does tie in a little bit to the fact that like we have, our primary contributor to greenhouse gas emissions is that transportation sector, and half of that is passenger vehicles. And like, anecdotally, so much of that is commuting to DC, right? Like, I grew up in Fredericksburg, my dad commuted to DC every day for work. He took Amtrak and like the sort of public rail or the like carpooling as frequently as possible because it's such a pain. But I think that like finding ways to make our public transit, especially commuting into DC, like either more accessible or more available, or like finding ways to upgrade those lines to make it a more attractive or more feasible thing, is another good like route to reducing the amount of passenger vehicles. Since there is like since that is such a thing, right, of people commuting into DC because of the cost of living there is so expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely see a system of things where we tried to promote the frequency of services for the VRE. I think it's the Virginia Regional Express that services like the Richmond, I think it's more.
Fredericksburg.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And yeah, it'd be good to see more modern electric locomotives brought in that are faster. I know America's rail lines tend to have a reputation of very slow engines relative to the rest of the Western world. So it'd be good to see infrastructure allowing for speedier, more reliable commuting pickup cities. If it is needed, but also, of course, we should try to cut down on commuting by, supporting the work at home initiatives and bring it back around.
You're right that is beyond DEQ's realm, but one of the agencies that we're talking to who will be participating in this process is DPRT. Is that right? Yeah.
DPRT.
Yeah, who's the Public Rail and Transit Authority.
And they have been looking at, various electrification projects and related projects as well, even going through looking at the workforce analysis is what needs would be out there to service and maintain electric buses and fleets. We have been in that space a little bit, and one of the other programs we minister is the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust. You may be familiar with when they had their defeat devices on vehicles, and the state's got a certain amount of trust fund money out of that. And one of the things we have done is funded electric transit buses, electric school buses through that. And again, it's a dual lesson. It serves you, it just tells you, you can go out and electrify. It's possible to do it. The downside comes when you look at the numbers and how much it costs to do it.
Yeah, so big upfront cost, but over time.
Yeah, and you're right. It depends on when you feel the cost versus the benefit.
Yeah.
And also like an infrastructure question as well, like, can you deploy electric school buses in rural areas, right? Like, is that reliable, is that accessible, is that economically impactful, and so.
We've had mixed success and failures in doing that.
Growing pains.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can, yeah, I think that's like a huge part of, this plan and any emission reduction measure is, looking at how it's deployed, but then feasibility, what's there to back it now and what would need to be taken to back it in the future and make it accessible to all residents, not just a select few, or a select areas, so that's a critical part of it. And same with the workforce thing too. I mean, workforce, like you both mentioned, like it's not just going to be, where we see growth is in clean energy. It's workforce is needed. Green workforces are needed across sectors. And so that analysis across sectors is going to be really critical. Yeah.
You mentioned the prayer of the bus, very mentioning things looking like, air quality. People. What I understand the current air quality monitors on goes out and monitor greenhouse gases more along the lines of small. And so is there those stations forward being able to monitor?
No, not at this time at all. The EPA monitors that through NOAA. I think there is a site in Virginia.
There is a
but-
site in Shenandoah National Park,
Yeah,
One side.
Yeah.
one site.
but
And
that's.
I just got, the subject came up, so I had to do a little research. The network, even worldwide, is not very big. But I think you do see variation, global variation you can capture by it. I think that the standard site that everybody goes by is a rainforest, a hill and a rainforest in Hawaii. It seems to be, because it's it's theoretically as far away from emission sources it's direct emissions sources that you can find.
There's such as methane, city having some of the structure around the gas and they kind of be there, still there's for monitoring. So not just CO2, but other greenhouse gases monitoring. Might be the bomb. I'm not sure if that's what you meant by air quality monitoring, just particulates and things like that. That might be out of scope, I guess, of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
There's actually two different types of monitoring. I think you're touching on both of them. There's ambient air quality monitoring where you're actually sampling what's going on in the air. But there's also emissions monitoring that we do at large industrial sites that directly monitor what they are emitting into the air. And we do a bunch of both of those things.
Is it point monitoring or is that how long?
Mainly point monitoring, because that's where most of the requirements to have that kind of equipment is. For larger sources, power plants, large industrial sources.
And then, like you mentioned, both are relevant, like both types of pollutants are relevant. When you look at like greenhouse gas emissions, we have a part of the plan that talks about co-benefits. So when we reduce things like CO2, how are we also able to then reduce, air pollutants, like PM 2.5, things like that. So both of those are relevant to the discussion of air quality in general. And then not necessarily, this is maybe more of a side tangent, but there is really cool satellite technology coming out that is able to capture sort of like methane emissions and methane leaks from landfills. And so that's not necessarily something that DEQ is doing specifically with satellite technology. That's just something in general that, we might be able to utilize in the future to better pinpoint where those emissions are coming from methane and the leaks. And EPA, NOAA, and all of them have actually been able to use a lot of that satellite data to estimate that, we're probably emitting maybe 4 times more methane than what was actually predicted before we had that satellite technology. So that's a pretty cool thing that, hopefully we could expand on, not necessarily for this plan, but just in general in the future. That'd be pretty cool.
I did just very briefly want to read a comment that we got in every chat, in terms of specific emission reduction measures. Donna was mentioning that in Rankin County, has mentioned that Patterson Avenue is a state road and it's been out of the county's jurisdiction to make improvements like sidewalks or a bike path. Even so,
if this important road would have safer options for walkers and for bikers, we could also reduce, vehicle mileage travel. And that is also, all of this input, we are actively taking note of, even though this is something that might not necessarily come underneath DEQ's purview.
Okay.
We do have an interstate, working group, and we're able to discuss all of the input that has been brought into the plan so far and all of these lovely ideas with our state partners. And we just want to say that we appreciate all those that left comments in the chat. We are making sure to take note of these as well as the conversation in person.
Yeah, I just want to be clear that this plan is not just aimed at coming up with a strategy that DEQ can exercise on its own.
Right.
It's far beyond that. It's what the state can do in all of its, either through voluntary measures or otherwise, using, states, the entire, all of government. I hate that phrase, but it's not just limited to DEQ. The Department of Rail and Public Transportation is gonna be involved. VDOT. Department of Transportation is gonna be, heavily involved in helping us.
And they are all
Plan as well.
doing programs either through federal grants, federal programs, or Virginia Energy is also actively involved in a lot of their programs in reducing energy consumption and looking at incentivizing solar and other renewable energy sources.
So we're just the lead agency designated by EPA.
Yeah,
to do
this is
what we come up with.
This is, again, the way I keep on kind of qualifying this plan as being kind of a roadmap with one or more pathways that could be used to get to significant emission reductions.
I think it hasn't been specifically said yet, but I'll throw out that, our second biggest contributor is that energy, electric production. And that at this point in time, in the progression of climate change, I feel pretty strongly that we shouldn't be building new fossil fuel plants. Period at all. I know that we have a lot of big energy needs and a lot of them are coming from data centers. Which I think has been a frustration with, for communities, right? Because the cost of that electricity is being transferred to communities instead of being put on the data centers. But I think in terms of specific emission reduction measures that, I know that I am interested in, and I also know that lots of people are interested in, especially given the work that's been done currently to, try to make clear to the Chesterfield board of supervisors that the gas plant that they're asking for, that they're looking to permit in the area is not something that the community is interested in. Given the place that we are at in climate change and given the progression that we've already seen, the consequences that we've already seen, it's pretty clear to me that our efforts to move away from greenhouse gases should start with not building fossil fuel plants.
Well, just to note, that's the whole,
For sure, yeah, and
goal of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, if it remains as it is.
this isn't me trying to say that any of y'all aren't interested, but I'm saying for the record.
Yeah.
One of the reduction measures I'd like to see.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Very, I don't.
And
Yeah.
there's really, and again, there is a conflict there going on between that large increase in demand that is being generated and things, statutes already on the books, which is gonna play itself out in this plan, and it's playing itself out in the General Assembly.
Yeah.
For the next few years. I think they'll be dealing with the energy, this energy issue for a long time.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the way it is now, the Virginia Clean Economy Act is still the law of the state, and our plan will be, one of the scenarios, what will it take to meet the Virginia Clean Economy Act requirements?
While still meeting.
Yeah.
What we're gonna see in terms of projected demand.
We actually do have a really cool renewable energy scheme that is actually quantifying a lot of that. So how many, well, it's already sort of being done. There's been studies by Glen and Cooper, for example,
quantifying the amount of land needed for solar to meet a certain amount of energy need per megawatt or something like that. So that sort of analysis is really cool to see, and hopefully we can incorporate that into the plan as well.
Yeah.
Like looking at, energy demand, but then also how that might impact your land use and things like that.
For sure, which I think is, and I know that the conversations around the environmental impacts of solar fields is like a whole thing that we could.
Yep.
All on its own. Which I think is one of the reasons why that kind of like placing solar in, like, and on top of already developed places is something that holds a lot of appeal to me. Not that we'll probably be able to meet all of our needs by chucking a solar panel on top of every roof.
Right.
But yeah, I think that like there is probably a lot of opportunity to offset the amount of impacts that we're gonna see to our land cover that will come from having to put solar fields just on the ground and having to convert, previously like forested or woodfield and land, to that specific solar field stuff. I know that's
The beast.
it's like, we love solar panels from the energy perspective, but then from the environmental and erosion perspective, like, they're a mess. Yeah, no, totally, that's a whole conversation on its own.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, it could be done, well, I want to say, it can be done right, and
Sure,
it's
for
been,
sure. And plenty of them are,
it's been a struggle.
but yeah, it's definitely been interesting. But I think also like, there are tons of options for us that aren't just solar that we should be like looking at and relying on. I know that, folks have talked a lot about, storage opportunities too, as a way to help us be achieving our energy needs. That doesn't necessarily require like huge sort of, the same kind of huge changes, but that can be very important to help us sort of deal with those peaks and stuff like that. So, I think broadly, like, trying to find ways to ramp up how much we're utilizing all of those technologies makes so much sense to me.
Well, storage is beginning to be ramped up.
Yep.
Signing more permits for it, and there are not too many of them, but we're getting more of them, and it does not have the land issues, obviously, and, the trouble with solar is that some actors have sort of generated a lot of public opposition based on, some very bad stories. And it's not everybody and it's not everywhere, but it's been enough to
Yeah, no, I know that's.
poison the well, so to speak.
For some areas, especially for solar specifically.
Anything coming in, Julie?
There is one other comment we just got. It's, I will paraphrase it a bit, but, so basically working with the SEC and with utility companies and PGM to modernize our electric grid would be helpful and would, reduce the amount of power loss, from the existing transmission. Transmission is a very big issue, almost as big as where the generation and demand, where that's gonna come from. Because they have to work hand in hand. The thing I would say is kind of an analogy is that our office also does environmental reviews of projects that come to us through the SEC and others. And I think almost on a daily basis these days, get a project to review on that's involved in transmission upgrades, new lines and that sort of thing. So there is a lot of work going on out there too. But the transmission lines bring along their own baggage. They're sort of akin to pipelines in the air to some degree. So there are opposition for some good reasons to all those kinds of things. And you gotta make your choice between, what's necessary. Solar power has its problems. Wind has its problems. We've only been able to permit one onshore wind project in Virginia because of the opposition to that type of
But
project.
it's under construction.
But it is under construction.
It's also had its fair share of opposition.
Yeah. And that project is also on its way up.
Yeah, I know.
CVOW is another Dominion one that is a little more iffy at the moment.
Yeah.
Down by, getting off, I guess.
Yeah, and the question, an elaboration on the question relates to updating existing transmission and distribution lines, not adding new ones. Agreed, I mean, but again, I think most of the projects that we've seen, going back to my analogy there, has been things being done to upgrade and improve and modernize existing transmission systems.
We have about 20 or so minutes left to give or take. So I think we'll, at least, we can continue these discussions as long as you please. We'll go into some of these sort of wrap up things as well, just how we can continue moving forward. Tom, if you don't mind going to advancing to the next slide.
Yep.
I think we covered a lot of this. This is our, last question for you. Maybe something to leave you with is what else is missing? What else can we consider? And I think we covered a lot of this, but if there's still more that you have to say and want to say, or maybe think about tonight before you go to bed, we'll continue to capture those thoughts. So next slide, if you don't mind. We have our community survey, and if you've taken it already, fantastic. We love that. If you haven't, it's not too late. It's open until April.
You can always take it again.
Vote early in office.
Fraud. Fine.
So it's reaching the
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so you can take this. So this is for you to take. It covers a lot of the questions that we asked actually of you tonight. So we can record that input a second time. And it covers a little bit more things in detail. So, just feel free to go through that at your own pace. It should take around 15 minutes to take, to fill out. And then, feel free to share this with your networks as well. We're trying to really cast a wide net. Our goal is to have, pretty much every locality covered, or at least represented in this survey as much as we can. And so that's an end goal for us, but would just love for you to take that. And so then the next slide, this is sort of our wrap up. So as mentioned, we have a bulletin so you can continue to stay engaged. We try not to spam you. So we really just try to send out about monthly mailers, just letting you know future engagements, things that you can keep an eye out for, summaries of some of our engagements. So any of those reference materials. We also have our website, which we mention a lot, and there's a great deal of information on there. So, feel free to peruse that at your own pleasure. And then our email. So we're always monitoring this email. If you want to continue having these conversations with us or want something specific to be noted or need clarifying information from us, we're always monitoring this and we're happy to respond to you and continue to provide that input, give you as much clarification as we can. And then we also have our feedback form for tonight. So again, even a third way to provide your input. So if there's still more things that you want to capture, but this is specifically, what can we improve in this process for you all? So maybe if you've gained anything from this meeting, we'd love to hear that. But if there's also things that you want us to be doing better or more of, we really want to capture that feedback as well. So that's for you to take online or in person with some of these. We would love to hear that feedback from you as well. Other than that, I think that's all we have for me tonight. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us and we'll stay as long as you guys want to continue having these discussions. But thank you so much, everybody, for all of your input, both in person and online. This was really valuable for us. And in terms of how we're capturing this feedback, I'll reconcile a little bit and what we're going to be doing with all of it. As of now, we're going to be doing 6 community listening sessions across the Commonwealth. And so at the end of that process, we're going to summarize all that we've heard and put that together in some of like a summary type of flyer that we'll be able to utilize, share out, and then reference as we start to physically write the plan and draft that up in the summer. Yeah. Any questions there? Does that sound good to you folks?
And then last but not least, we will be back at some point later in the year with to present the contents of a draft plan.
Thank you all for participating.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for your patience.
All right. Kevin, if you're still on there, I think we'll be good to say to wrap up.
All right. Thank you very much, Alison. Great job, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and close tonight's webinar. Thank you, everybody. And we're going to get a posting of the recording, I think. Right, Alison?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Very good. Enjoy the rest of the evening. I'm going to go ahead and close the webinar.
Thank you, Kevin.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.